Welcome to A Rare Reality, a podcast powered by Jordan's Guardian Angels. I'm Christina Janes, Director of Outreach and Awareness for JGA, and today we are joined by a very special guest. Abbey Hauser is with us today from Owning My Story. And Abbey, we're so excited to have you with us today to chat about your story, because you are really just a pillar of strength and such a big voice for the rare disease community. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here and continue spreading that message of owning your story and how it works for everyone in the community.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Okay, so first, for anyone out there who may not know you, let's talk about you. Let's tell us your story.
Okay, it's a very big starting point.
Right? Yeah. But tell us about you. Tell us about your diagnosis. Tell us about how you got to this place of really wanting to tell your story.
Okay, yeah. So I was diagnosed. My journey is a little bit different than I think a lot of people, even in my own disease community, but I was diagnosed in 2001-ish when I was 6 or 7 with classical Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder that my mutation is specifically in a collagen 5 gene. And collagen, I think it's become popularized when people take collagen supplements and they are recognizing that it's a protein and that it does all this stuff for your body. But in me, the collagen has a mutation that just impacts how the structure is created. So it's essentially faulty. It's a little bit weakened. And then the symptoms that can cause can impact anywhere that collagen is found in your body, which is pretty much everywhere from your skin to like your joints, your tendons, lots of organ systems, things like that. But when I was diagnosed in 2001, they really didn't know a lot about it. Progress had been made. The gene for my type, because there are I think 13 or 14 subtypes of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And mine is not the most common type. They're still searching for the gene for the most common type. But with mine, there's a lot of influence on the skin, especially like the skin is especially fragile and just prone to bruising and tearing and really slow wound healing. And then you have joint issues that come with how I was diagnosed was that I started dislocating my knee as a young child. I was maybe 5 or 6 when it happened for the first time. And it happened when I was just rolling over in bed. Like I remember I was playing a make-believe game with these dominoes that I used to always play with. And I remember something fell off, and clearly something had been happening before that. Like my knee, now that I know the language, would have been partially dislocating prior to this moment, because I remember it first happened and I was like, oh, it'll go back in. I was like, my little brain was like, oh, like this is a familiar-ish feeling. It'll make its way back in place. And it was not for that time. And that's when I, had to panic. We were having a garage sale. And so my parents were outside and I was in the house by myself because they were just right outside. So I remember having to call for help and all this stuff that sort of built into that. But then it kept happening. At first it was kind of like, it's a really weird thing that would happen. And then like maybe weeks or months later, I was just laying on the floor coloring. I was laying on my stomach and my knees were bent, swinging like a little kid does. And then my knee just dislocated, essentially, which is when it just comes out of its place.
Right.
And if you think of your knee, it's a lot easier to imagine that one coming out of place than some other joints. So then that's when my pediatrician was like, all right, something is a little bit funky. And we lucked out. I think that he either had just read something about this condition or something happened that he was kind of like, you need to go see someone. And then I don't know who the steps, again, I was 6 or 7. I don't remember the steps, but we eventually got to a geneticist fairly quickly after my first few dislocations. And at that point, they were already evaluating for this condition. It wasn't like, what could it be? It was kind of like, this is what we think it is. We're going to do the testing and see where it goes from there. But when I was diagnosed at that point, we got the diagnosis. They didn't do genetic testing at that time because they didn't have a way to test for the gene yet. They knew the gene, but it was again 2001. I think the gene was
Right.
discovered not that long before, and we didn't do like quick blood tests for gene testing. So we did a skin biopsy to look at the collagen that you have under a microscope, and that clearly showed something was off. And then they could test for like one other severe type of EDS. They had that test accomplished, so they like ruled that one out. Um, and then they made this clinical diagnosis with some molecular basis. But they were kind of like, I've read the geneticist letter back when letters were sent to
Yeah.
parents and their families. It's like this 3-page, really detailed, like summary of the appointment that you would never get today. But
No.
it details, it's kind of like, well, like she might have joint issues. She might like continue dislocating. There might be like orthopedic concerns in the future. And then if she ends up having too much like wound issues, like delayed healing or like bleeding things, so like here's a hematologist you could go see.
Hmm.
And that was kind of it. They didn't explain, I think because they didn't know, but they didn't
Right.
really know that symptoms could progress. They didn't know that things could change. We didn't have a lot of that information. So then I think my parents just kind of took that and um, sort of let that be. It wasn't something that we discussed as kids.
Yeah.
Growing up, I think I recently texted I have 3 other siblings, and I texted one of them and I was like, did you know that I had EDS growing up? Because like I'd never talked about it. I didn't tell my friends. So I was like, I don't know what mom and dad were telling you. And I
No,
was too young to think about like, what have we told each other?
right.
Um, and I think my sister was like, "Oh, no, I remember like fully understanding it when you wrote your first blog post."
Hmm.
She's like, and then I Googled it because I knew the names. So I think it was explained in some lighter terms, just like going in for like surgery or like this injury, but it wasn't like this is
This is why.
this
Right.
is the name. It wasn't that. So for so long, for through like no fault of anyone, it's just like not how we engaged. We weren't advocating for EDS. There wasn't a ton of resources out there at that time anyway for parents to get together. Um, and then as I got older, it started to affect me more, which is something I don't think we really thought about or like prepared for. Because again, we weren't told that symptoms would change or progress or that
Sure.
things would happen differently medically as I got older. So as I hit high school, I was having more issues with my knees, and I was doing all these sports that I wasn't technically supposed to do, but my parents were at least of the mindset. They're like, "We'll listen to the advice of no contact sports, but otherwise, we'll let you pursue your interests until they feel unsafe. We're not just gonna um,
Keep
take
it home.
everything." Yeah. So I
Right.
think they told me the doctor said when I was little, I think it was like swim or play golf. And
Well,
then they're like, or you could do theater or something. And I was like, I don't want to do any of those. Uh,
yeah,
I
you
remember
knew
being,
what you wanted to do, right.
yeah.
But
And I was like,
it's
this seems
kind of
weird.
it's kind of incredible though that your parents were like, okay, well, until you can't or don't want to, go do,
Yeah.
and that's it gives you a freedom that, you might not have otherwise have had.
Yeah. And I remember the only thing that was ever different about me in sports, I played soccer as a kid, like most kids end up playing.
Yeah.
Was not good, but I had these custom little tiny, they're adorable. I still have them. They're custom knee braces for like a 6 and 7-year-old because they
Yeah.
don't make them that small because not an age group that you need those things.
Right.
So I had to wear those like in addition to like the shin guards. So it was almost like it was like shoe, shin guard, this like bulky knee thing, and then like shorts. And it just looked like I was like padded up to
It
high
was very
heavens.
well padded. Yes.
Yes. And I remember hating them because it was like a visible. Because again, we weren't like telling people. I mean, maybe my parents were. Again, I don't know what they were telling their friends
Yeah.
on the sidelines, but I wasn't telling people because I barely knew the
Well,
diagnosis.
right.
So I remember that was like a very visible thing, and I remember being so uncomfortable with that. Um, so then as I got older, I got used to wearing knee braces, and that like stopped bothering me because I would just tell people like, "Oh, I dislocate my knee," and they're like, "Whoa, yeah, you should definitely wear a knee brace."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they didn't care. And as you got to high school, a lot of people end up with knee injuries in sports, so it wasn't as weird as it was when you were 6 or 7. But then my senior year of high school, I I had 2 knee surgeries my senior year of high school that we had decided on that were supposed to help at least reduce some dislocations, but we had to wait till I was done growing. And it was like the lesser of 2 really invasive options.
Mhm.
We were given one option that was like, we can derotate your femur, which it sounds terrible. That sounds, to me, it sounds like a very barbaric surgery. And it,
Sound pleasant at all. Yeah.
no. So my parents, I think, were like, yeah, let's get another opinion.
Yeah.
So we found someone else, and he was like, "Oh, we could do this other thing that would probably help." Um, but that kind of brought all my issues to the real forefront, where it was senior year, and it was like I kind of had to decide when I wanted to do them because we needed to do both knees, but it's not recommended to do both at the same time. And then I was going to college, so it's like, what do you do in that point? But as that happened and that became more visible, it was just time in my life where I was like, oh, I can actually use this opportunity to like tell people why I'm having the surgeries and not just be like, oh, I hurt my knee. So I think that was the first time I started like actually telling people that I was like, oh, I have this medical condition. It's genetic, and kind of went from there because they were already
Yeah.
asking questions. And that felt really comfortable to me at that point, which was like a complete 360 from, or 180, I guess, from where I was when I was younger, when I was like afraid to go to the nurse as a kid because I
Yeah.
didn't want them to tell my parents that like I had a symptom.
Well, you'd gotten older, you had a different vision, and you felt empowered to tell it in your own right, to be able to say, no, this is, I mean, yes, this is what's happening, but this is why. There's a root cause for this. How was it received?
I think it was well received. Again, these were people that I'd known for a really long time, so part of me felt weird sharing it where I was like, "Hey, we've been friends since 5th grade. Here's this thing that I've had this entire time that I just didn't tell you about." Um, but I like no one thought it was weird. I think I don't know, because like it's very obvious. Like my fingers are very hypermobile, and they like really stand out. They're just like long and skinny. So in general, I think people were always noticing that about me, like growing up. But no one sort of like that part was more obvious. But I think in my brain, I was like, no one notices this. But then I'd get like 8 questions every time I'd meet someone new when they'd see like my finger bend a way that it wasn't supposed to, and would just easily be like, I'm like, I'm just double jointed, like no worries.
Yeah. And
And
then
like that's yeah, and that was well received in general. So I think that kind of helped ease some of that. And like I knew my elementary school teachers knew some stuff. Because I remember I moved to a new school in 4th grade.
Mhm.
We had another boy in my class that had cerebral palsy, and
Mhm.
his fingers were double jointed. And I remember my 4th grade teacher at like the second parent teacher conference was like, "Oh, I bet like having Christian in class with you like helps the other kids like not think that your hands are any different." And I remember being like, "Oh, people are thinking that?"
Yeah.
It's like didn't even process that that was something that
It's interesting sometimes when people try to bring comfort, and in reality, you're like, I think you meant that in a really nice way, but I'm not entirely positive.
yeah, so that was I think like I've slowly built up all these moments where I'm like, "Oh, people have been noticing
Mhm.
things, just not enough to be like, hey,
Right.
let's ask more questions." And then leaving for college is this great time for anybody, but especially for me to sort of reestablish who you are, or just establish for the first time with a group of people. And I don't think I consciously was like, I'm going to start identifying with my diagnosis. But
Right.
I remember I started sharing it like right away with people. I wear a medical ID bracelet now than I did in college. And that prompts a lot of questions from people. It's just a natural thing. They see it and they want to know if you're like allergic to something.
Yeah.
So, but I used it as like a kind of like my gateway to start telling these new people that I'd never met before. I was like, oh, I actually have this genetic condition, and sort of started with that. And I remember how freeing that felt. And then as I started to have more medical issues, I guess, in college, I ended up having to redo one of those knee surgeries because some screws broke. And then the bone wasn't healing for like a year. And it was just like a whole thing in college when I'm trying to set up
Real.
my new identity. And
Yeah.
but it helped because I'd started telling people about this. So then when I needed help, or not even when I needed it, when I should have needed it and didn't want to ask for it, I was lucky enough to have really great friends that were just showing up, and they like came to visit right after, and like just things that friends from high school weren't doing because I wasn't talking about it.
Mhm.
So it's like, why would they know to show up after like a hard medical appointment because I didn't tell them that I was going
Right.
to like a cardiologist that day. I just said, I was like, oh yeah, I got a doctor, and they just assume it's like a physical,
Yeah.
and they're not thinking of deeper connotations that going to a doctor could have. So then as I got further in college, I ended up fracturing or getting some stress fractures in my spine. Again, because we didn't know that collagen is in your bones and it can affect your bone density. We just didn't know to test for that or to check
Yeah.
for levels or like to pay attention to that. Because I'd been having back pain for a really long time, and then it just like really like escalated. So clearly there was some like early signs that maybe we could have done something before it got to that stage. But that was sort of the catalyst for everything, because that shaped how I interacted with the world completely, because sitting became the hardest task for me, and that's what we do all day.
Right.
Um, when you're in college, I would sit through like a 1 hour lecture and come home to my apartment and lay on my wood floor, because it was felt the best. It was
Right.
relieved the most amount of pressure, but I would have to lay there for like 3 hours. And I just remember being like, this is not the life I imagined. And I was on the rowing team in college. I was a coxswain. So I was the smaller person that sat in the back of the boat. And my senior season, we were a Division 1 program. And by the time we got all these results back, my department was like, this seems like more of a liability to have you continue with our team. And I understood that because they're looking out for safety and you're on the water. And if something were to happen and you're far from access, then you're the one steering the boat. It's kind of hard to like take you out.
Yeah.
So I understood where they were coming from, but that shaped all my friends were my teammates in college.
It's very
Uh,
disappointing to say this.
yes. So by senior year, I'm not looking for new friends because I've already established other friends. I lived with teammates, but all of a sudden that was taken from me. And then just like going to class was harder. And I was like, I don't even know what my future will look like. If I can't even sit through a lecture. I was like, the jobs that I wanted to do, my undergrad is in kinesiology, which is exercise science, involved a lot more physical work. So I was like, I don't know. And I just didn't think I had told enough people about it. And I just didn't know where to process all of these emotions because I didn't want to dump them consistently on my best friend, even though she lived with me and definitely helped through the most of it. But I just felt like I was like, I want to somehow update everybody, but update them in a way that I don't have to bear the brunt of like repeating myself.
Mhm.
And that's when, during that time, I was reading a book by Brene Brown. And she mentioned something about owning your story,
Mhm.
where if you don't own, or if you own your story, you get to essentially like write the ending. But if you deny it, the ending is written for you. And there's a lot of other things, and that's a really bad paraphrasing of that quote. But
No, but it
it's
makes sense.
yeah,
If you take it and you make it your own and you're able to tell it in your own right and you're able to put it out there in the way that you know is true to you, nobody else can take that from you.
yeah. So I remember hearing that. I remember I was like going to the rec center in college while my team was at practice because I was like, I don't know what else to do with my time.
Yeah.
And it was trying to like gently walk on the treadmill, like back to ground zero of like rebuilding everything, just trying to find where I now fit in my abilities. So I was listening to a lot of audiobooks at that time. And I also listened to a book about grit.
Mhm.
I think that one's by Angela Duckworth, and it was equally impactful just in the way that like the people that keep trying are the ones that succeed the most. Um, so I was listening to all these books at that time, and I remember hearing that while walking on the treadmill one day, and I was like, oh, I was like, I've got to do something.
Mhm.
And somehow, just over winter break, I decided right before the spring semester of my senior year of college, I was like, I'm going to start a blog. I don't know anything about a website. I don't know anything about hosting a website. I don't know how this works. But I'm going to try it.
Got some time and I'm gonna do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was like, I remember it was like January 2nd because my hosting package still renews on the same day.
Mhm.
Every year to this day, but it's like it's either January 2nd or 3rd. So like right after the new year, I was like, I am committing to this. And I don't even remember what my first post was, but it was essentially like, here's me just trying to process what's happening. I'm doing this for myself. If it helps someone else in the meantime, that's great. But I always started this project as a means to process my own thoughts and feelings. And I've always believed that in storytelling, and I think this is advice that I've gotten from somewhere else, but people find a lot of universal meaning in specific stories. So if you share something very specific, people tend to weirdly relate to it more than if you try to generalize how you're feeling about things, or if you're trying to tell a story and you try to stay really vague, thinking that it'll help more people, it resonates with less people. So
Mhm.
I kind of took that in where I was like, I'm just going to share exactly what's going on with me. I'm not going to, and it's not going to be like medical updates. It's more like the frame of mind and how I'm figuring things out. And that felt really confident because then so many of my like extended family members were reading it. And I wasn't having to like text them all to be like, hey, I'm no longer on this team that we're at.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was great in that sense. And then it's just kind of taken off. I created an Instagram page with it. That is now like the main one that I use. I don't even use my personal one, but I knew that was a way that I could try to connect with some other people, and just update through that lens. And it's just really kind of taken off from there. But it stayed in that same mindset where it's writing when I feel motivated and inspired, and not on a schedule, or trying to like monetize it or anything.
No, no,
It's
the way it's
completely stayed true to its original intent, where it's just words when I feel like they're ready to be shared and written, are when they get shared. And it's just totally revolutionized, I feel like, how I am as a person and the confidence that I have. And then it led me to finding my space in this rare disease community,
I was
which
gonna
I
say, you
would
have
not lose.
there's an incredible support system of other people who share this same diagnosis, but then there's this broader rare disease community, which I always say, we've these rare disease diagnoses are so they're teeny tiny, but this community is so big and so strong. How does that feel for you to know, though, that you have the backing of this incredible community, other people who live their lives the same way or similar to the way that you do, and then the broader community as a whole? How does that feel? Because you become this voice.
It feels incredible. I love the rare disease community as a whole. It's where I found my first set of community.
Mhm.
I didn't find it. I tried to find community in my own disease space as like a teenager when you're first trying to
Right.
find your space in the world, and found some Facebook groups that were with people that were like 30 years older than me and were not helpful. So for a while, I was like, I don't know that I want to engage with anybody. Then I found the rare disease space, and I was blown away just by the immediate connection and support, that I had just for anything that I was sharing, and that anyone was even taking the time to read and acknowledge what I was saying, but also like share with me how it's related to them or who they've shared a post that I've written with someone else, and then they've connected. So that whole backing just is really important to me because I think it's something I never saw myself having,
Mhm.
because as a kid, we didn't talk about it. We didn't build this
Right.
community. We weren't a family of advocates. So I just never thought that it would be where I would find most of my friends and people that I enjoy engaging with and working with on a daily basis. So it's important, I think, in that sense, and it means a lot to me because it's just somewhere I never saw myself going, and I'm so glad that I ended up here, though.
And you're here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell me quickly about, I mean, it is hard enough to run a half marathon or a marathon when you have, typical joint and collagen systems, right? How? How did you do
That's
this
a great question.
marathon? And I was like, I'm not going to make it. I mean, what an inspiration you are. Holy moly.
Thank you. I still to this day have no idea how it happened. It took 2 efforts. I tried in 2017, and failed, and I, like, lovingly say the word fail because I fully believe that we can admit to failures and we don't have to sugarcoat it, because I had dropped out of the race at mile 22. It took about 7.5 hours to get there, and it was 7.5 hours of, like, a nightmare race situation. Like, I felt so much love and support from so many people that day, but like my body from the get-go, I made a mistake with my medications. I left them in a bag that I had like bag checked. So then was working with my charity team manager that I was running with to like try to figure out how we're going to get them to me at some point on the course because I take pain medication. So then to not have that at the start of one of the most painful days was just already
Right.
not a great sign.
Then you went back for more.
I did. So that year I was kind of like, you know what? I didn't feel like my ending. And I've always believed that I'm not just like a glutton for pain. So I know that if something is not working for me, I always believe that I'll know that it's time to switch it up.
Mhm.
So I did not feel like I was done running. I did not feel like I was done with my marathon. It's not like everything went right that day and it didn't happen. There was a lot of things that went wrong and I was like, I think I could change a lot of things about how I approach this and still do it. And then I actually got to run the next year with my best friend, Anna, who ran as my guide the entire way. She's a much faster runner than I am. And it's equally as hard for someone to slow themselves down
Sure.
to run double the time that it takes to to run a marathon. And that was just equally as special to be able to share that with her. And she helped me stay on track and I still, yeah, I don't even know how it happened that day. Like I felt better than I ever felt running in that single day. So it was just like some race day magic. But it was just one of those goals that I saw myself completing after I had 3 knee surgeries. I was like, oh, actually, I want to run a marathon.
Gotta go do it.
'Cause-
Yeah.
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 So then I was like, you know what? Now's the time. If I wait too much longer, like I know that my spine will just get worse. So I was like, this seems like might as well be the best that I'll get. So might as well try it, and, so glad that it worked.
It's amazing. I mean, so for our families that are listening to this, or the greater community as a whole, what's your advice for owning their story or owning their? So we have a wide variety of age groups here, right? We have
Yeah.
the younger children, and we have teens and young adults, and so for those who can convey their own story, or for parents who are wanting to tell their child's story, what's your message on how to get started on owning your story?
I think I've heard this a lot, in a lot of different contexts, but I think it can never be overstated, is that it's important to start where you are. If you jump in, trying to go too far, whether it's something that's too vulnerable and you're not, like, emotionally ready to share it, or if you are trying to, like, make it something bigger than it is, it's just not going to feel authentic and it's going to feel a lot of like tension inside of you.
Mhm.
I know times that I've tried to share something before I was ready to like fully process it and put it out there. Um, were times that I did not feel like I was confident in sharing it, and it made me want to never share something again because I was like, that was not a great experience.
Work,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I think starting, whether it's you're feeling confident about just sharing your diagnosis or your child's diagnosis, or even just getting into a little bit more of the like the personal side of it and not just being like this is the diagnosis. Maybe just running through whether it's writing it up or just sharing it with people, but the emotion side of it where like I don't know, and I still want to ask my parents this someday, but like I don't know how they felt
Mhm.
sitting in that geneticist's office because I was a kid and I was clueless.
Right, right.
I don't know what it's like to get a diagnosis in general because I grew into my diagnosis, so there's no like before and after for me. So a lot of times that's like a great starting point if you feel comfortable diving into just how you felt that day and just smaller things. It doesn't have to be this like giant overarching, here's like all the medical things that have happened. It can just be like this one moment or this one how everything changed or how your thoughts changed. Or just focusing on one little story. Like it could just be like a something that you're proud of is equally important to share your story with. Like I wrote about my marathon and I easily could have just left it and not shared anything about it, but I felt equally proud of the accomplishment, but also I wanted to thank everyone that helped me along the way. Um, so doing that, I think I didn't start sharing my story until I was ready. So if for me, it took 21 years almost to finally start, which I know like I started still young, but it took me that much time to feel confident in it. So if you were to make me do something about it, I think I wrote about dislocating my knee once in like 8th grade. And even that like made me really nervous. And it was for like a memoir assignment. And I was still so nervous. So if you would have told me I had to keep writing about it at that age, I would have shut down and not felt confident.
Yeah.
So I think starting where you are gets said a lot, but it can never be, I think, overused in this case because it'll feel more natural for you to feel confident in your story if you slowly build up to it. And even if you just dip your toe in the shallow end and tell one friend about it, or make a small post on like a awareness day
Mhm.
that's already created. Those are all like kind of little ways to dig in. And then just kind of once you feel confident and get a good reception from there, it becomes a lot easier.
Well, you are an inspiration. I'm so
Thank you.
grateful that you were willing to tell your story here for our families and for the community as a whole. And I'm going to connect your Instagram to the notes section of the podcast so that everyone can see that and take a look and kind of join you on your journey too. And hopefully, some of our families will connect with you. I can't wait to follow you on Instagram and see what you're up to. And I just appreciate you, and I appreciate you, putting a voice out there that is so important because this thought of I can do it and I'm going to do it and I'll tell you how I did it is, so important for our families to see too that there's so much hope out there and you're a blessing. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I really
I look
appreciate it.
so forward to seeing what else you do. So the
So
future,
do I.
yes. Abby, thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you want to check out our other podcasts, you can find them on any of the major podcast platforms, YouTube as well for translation services, or on our website. You can watch these videos, jordansguardianangels.org. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.